With the dawning of the Third Punic War in 149 BC, the doom of Carthage was at hand. To all looking on, its fate seemed clear. If the Carthaginians could not beat the Romans as masters of a mighty empire, what hope did they have now as mere rulers of but a single city? And yet, it still commanded one of the mightiest capitals of the ancient world. Boasting over 30 kilometers of circuit walls, triple-layered defenses, fortified harbors, and a dense urban acropolis, there was much for any would-be invader to overcome. That is without even mentioning its 300,000-strong population, which stood ready to defend their homes in the event of an existential crisis. And so, wounded as this lion of Africa was, it still had fight left in it. This would be a painful lesson for the Wolf of Rome, in what would prove to be one of the longest sieges in its history. Today, let us witness the first wave of attacks in the epic Siege of Carthage.
The Third Punic War came at a time when armies of the Roman Republic were taking on seemingly all of their rivals across the Mediterranean at once. For a soldier or a consul, this was a once-in-a-lifetime chance to reap great rewards of gold and glory. Now you can put together your own crew of treasure-seeking adventures by picking from over 800 heroes with today's sponsor. This game has actually been doing a great job scratching my itch for on-the-go dungeon diving, boss fights, and arena battles. The game has a massive amount of replayability, and there's always something new to do, be it on mobile or PC. Their most recent update, for instance, brings my childhood crashing through the walls with this Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles collaboration. Taking on a dragon-mounted Shredder is definitely something a childhood me could only ever have dreamed of. During this crossover event, the 7-day login reward gets you Michelangelo, who spreads debuffs and taunts. Through the end of November 13th, you can also collect all 6 Ninja Turtle champions to unlock a special reward bonus. So be sure to download Raid Shadow Legends now using my link in the description below or the QR code up there to get started. Right now, you'll get 2 free legendary champions and 2 free epics. New players can also pick from one of the following 6 legendary champion codes: Tree Hugger, Get Alice, Desert Queen, Monkey King, Demon Slayer, and UD King. Once you're in, come find me under Invicta H and join our clan Invicta History. See you out there.
The Third Punic War had been declared in 149 BC in the most lopsided of fashions. Carthage, diminished, disarmed, and defanged by the stipulations of the prior war, had little interest in drawing the ire of Rome. Thus, in the interbellum years, it had focused on domestic matters while shrugging off decades of torment and insult from its neighbors. Yet, at every turn, Rome had acted in bad faith. From turning a blind eye to the Numidians as they chipped away at Punic territory, to using Carthaginian self-defense as casus belli, and rebuffing all attempts at de-escalation. So desperate were the Carthaginians for peace that they had surrendered their leaders, their children, and even their entire armory as appeasement. But this was not enough for Rome, who next demanded that they abandon their city entirely. With such ludicrous terms, the Punic ambassadors returned home with the heaviest of hearts. Back in Carthage, panic had reached a fever pitch. This crescendoed with the arrival of the envoys and the sight of enemy sails on the horizon. The Council of 104 summarily rejected Rome's demands as a shamelessly brazen overreach. The city may no longer have been a superpower, but neither was it a meek slave. There would be no surrender. What followed was a scene of indescribable madness. All who had previously argued for appeasement were lynched, stoned, or torn to pieces, while mobs went door to door hunting down any Italians who could be sacrificed as just recompense for the rapaciousness of their leaders. Meanwhile, the city was full of wailing and wrath of fear and furore. People took refuge in the temples, invoking the gods who had abandoned them. All ran to the empty dockyards, the stables, and the armories to curse those who had robbed them of the means to now defend themselves. But a few kept their wits about them. These went to the gates and bolted shut the great doors of Carthage. The city would go down fighting. To this end, Appian reports the populace was seized by grim determination. Quote, "All minds were filled with courage from this transformation. All the sacred places, the temples, and every other unoccupied space were turned into workshops, where men and women worked together day and night without pause, taking their food by turns on a fixed schedule. Each day they made 100 shields, 300 swords, 1,000 missiles for catapults, 500 darts and javelins, and as many catapults as they could. For strings to bend them, the women cut off their hair for want of other fibers." For the provision of the army, the citizen body was raised to take up arms, as were the slaves, who had been granted their freedom by decree of the Senate. For generals, they chose 2 men by the name of Hasdrubal, one to command the defences, and the other to maintain control of the 30,000-strong army which had been raised in the field. Against them came the Romans, whom Appian claims numbered 80,000 foot and 4,000 horse, supported by a fleet of 50 quinquiremes and 100 galleys. While modern scholars tend to cast doubt on the size of this force, it was nonetheless a massive one, the likes of which had not been seen for many years. As the combined Roman fleet and army approached, it will now be worth reviewing the target of their campaign. The city of Carthage lay at the tip of a promontory jutting out into the Bay of Tunis. This, in and of itself, offered great geographic protection. Man-made features further enhanced the position. Chief among them was a 32-kilometre-long set of circuit walls which fully enclosed the urban centre and its neighbouring agricultural district, the Megara. Most formidable still was the triple-layered portion of the walls which ran along the 5-kilometre-wide neck of the peninsula. Featuring a series of palisades and ditches, it culminated in a massive 9-metre-thick and 20-metre-tall wall studded with towers and honeycombed by barracks and stables. To the south, a small section of the outer wall connected the landward defences to the fortified ports known as the Kothon. First came the outer merchant harbour, and further within, the military harbour. The latter of these was most impressive. Its round shipyards had enough capacity to house over 200 vessels. At its heart was a central island bearing the admiral's quarters. These were elevated so as to survey the entire area. Access to the harbours, meanwhile, was controlled by a series of tower-studded walls and a great chain which could be raised in emergencies. Altogether, this was to be among the most heavily fortified cities ever to find itself in the crosshairs of a Roman siege. Before such a mighty capital, even the Romans must have been awed. Yet the consuls believed that by pressing an immediate assault, they might precipitate a swift surrender, or, at the very least, catch its defenders unprepared. Thus, plans were drafted for a 2-pronged assault. The consul Manilius would attack directly from the isthmus, while his colleague Censorinus attacked from the south flank. The first of these assaults saw the main body of Roman troops erect a camp along the plains. Here, they hastily prepared ladders, rams, ditch-filling materials, and other equipment. With these, the eager maniples of heavy infantry charged the enemy. Details are sparse, but it seems that they managed to begin fording the outermost trench and surmounting its low parapet. However, whatever hopes of quick victory may have energized their charge were quickly dashed. The Carthaginians answered with a hellish retort. Arrows, slings, bolts, and catapult stones, which had been crafted in the feverish preparations of the past days, now rained down upon the Roman lines to deadly effect. To make matters worse, any troops who managed to brave the maelstrom were swept off the fortifications by swift counterattacks. These were not the browbeaten Carthaginians of just a few weeks prior. In the face of such a vigorous defense, the assault drew back. Meanwhile, the forces of Consul Censorinus hoped to capitalize on the distraction by bringing to bear ladders by land and sea against the more weakly built walls to the south. Yet here too they were met with unexpectedly stiff resistance. Troops approaching on the ground were turned into pincushions as they disembarked to charge up the narrow tongue of land which offered no cover or room to maneuver. The situation was worse for the sitting duck legionnaires, forced to make their approach aboard crowded warships. Here, their confined decks made easy killing fields for the Punic troops directly overhead. Appian mentions that some of these vessels had been equipped with ladders mounted to their prows with assault teams at the ready, but, as had occurred on land, all attempts to ascend these rickety contraptions only resulted in the doom of those foolhardy enough to try. But the consuls were far from giving up. Bull-headed as they were, it seems a second assault was ordered shortly after the first. Whether probing for perceived weak points or hoping to catch an enemy low on ammunition, they found neither. Carthage stood just as strong. Thus the Romans were cast back, bloodied and bruised, a second time. And so, in those first days of the Siege of Carthage, the Punic lion roared, and the wolf of Rome was humbled. Dazed by this turn of events, the two consuls now took a moment to regroup. This involved setting up camp along the isthmus and stationing ships around the harbour entrance to more properly begin tightening the noose around their foe. Yet the situation was complicated by the 30,000-strong Punic army which lay at the rear. While not mighty enough to take on the consular army directly, it could certainly undermine it. This included cutting off potential land-based supply lines and harassing foragers. For instance, when the consul Censorinus sent troops to collect wood for the construction of fresh siege works, the enemy was quickly upon them. Under the command of a certain Himilco, cavalry squadrons proved brutally effective, killing over 500 troops and seizing important materials in just one notable raid. Despite such losses, the consuls were nonetheless able to collect the requisite material to mount a third wave of attacks. These came once more against the two positions. Against the triple walls, the legions made some advances. Portions of the outer ditch were now firmly filled and their crossing protected by makeshift shield emplacements. This allowed troops to begin tearing down the next layer of defensive works. But the going was tough and subject to relentless pressure from the Carthaginians. After several more bloody days of effort, the consul Manilius is said to have despaired of ever taking the city by this side. Thus, the Romans would seek another way. Efforts were now directed against the southern wall. It was here that Censorinus had slowly been filling in the shallow lake, widening the approach available to the legions. Beyond bowshot, his troops had also completed the construction of a pair of monstrous rams. One was to be hauled into place by 6,000 foot troops, while the other was to be driven by an equivalent number of sailors. Such a division of labours was likely intended as a means to boost morale by having either side compete for the glory of first breaching the enemy's wall. In the weeks that followed, the great engines were slowly brought to bear. Climbing mounds of earth, the rams' heads aimed high. Then, shift after shift, crews hammered away at the stonework. During this process, we must imagine the withering exchange of missiles as both attacker and defender attempted to suppress the other. Eventually, the legions managed to erode a portion of the walls. As it fell away, they caught a glimpse of the city inside. Their prize was in sight. But the Punic commander had his own counterplays in mind. That evening, he applied determined pressure to regain control of the damaged portion of the walls. The fighting was fierce, but Rome's grip was eventually pried loose. Next, he dispatched work crews to initiate urgent repairs. These toiled all night. To buy them more time, sorties were launched beyond the walls. Carthaginians now plunged into the Roman siege lines bearing torches. While they failed to entirely destroy the rams, enough damage was inflicted to render them useless. Nonetheless, the Roman commanders were eager to regain the advantage. Once more, troops were massed before the damaged section of the wall and poured into the breach. On the opposite side lay a patch of open ground where ranks of Carthaginians had massed. Behind the armed men were swarms of regular citizens with nothing more than stones, clubs, and improvised weapons, while above them, atop the nearby rooftops, were more individuals ready to offer ranged and morale support. Such was the hornet's nest that had been stirred by the intrusion of the legions. Appian reports that as the Roman units squeezed through the opening to make a pass at the defenders, they were brutally hit from all sides. Rank after rank was mauled in this way. Only Scipio Aemilianus, then a military tribune, had the quick thinking to properly divide and rein in his units. Thus were they able to properly secure the breach, ensuring the beachhead remained open and preventing the utter destruction of Allied units during their retreats. Only such valiant efforts brought a silver lining to an otherwise grim and fruitless day of attacks. Further events undercut the Roman siege. First came sickness. It broke out in the camp of Censorinus on account of the stagnant waters of the nearby lake. As this malady took hold, the situation was improved by relocating the camp nearer the sea. However, this now brought them in reach of a Carthaginian ploy. Sensing an opportunity, the defenders secretly launched a fleet of small rafts. These were set alight and swiftly carried by westerly winds directly onto the new Roman position. In the conflagration which followed, much of the invading fleet was destroyed. To make matters worse, Censorinus returned to Rome for elections, leaving behind his consul Manilius, who lacked much military experience. Thus undermined, the Carthaginians were emboldened to attack them. This manifested one night as a massive sally against the legionary camp. Punic forces rushed across the ditches and began tearing down the palisades. Now was a chance to right the wrongs and drive the invaders back. If the foe could be wounded here, then perhaps Hasdrubal and the field army could close in for the kill. Unfortunately, such dreams would be dashed. Once more, in this hour of chaos, it was Scipio who saved the Romans by riding out with the cavalry to throw back the assailants. Even still, this had been a close-run affair. In the aftermath, Censorinus was shaken by the threat to his life. He now fell back from the enemy walls to establish a more heavily fortified camp in the middle of the peninsula. It was anchored along the sea by an additional fort meant to secure a landing for the supply ships vital to his continued campaign. Such moves betrayed the reality of the situation that was settling in. This would not be a short siege. But few at the time could have predicted that it would drag on for another 3 grueling years. Join us next time as we continue the story of the Siege of Carthage. For now, you can catch script previews and download HD versions of our art on Patreon and YouTube memberships. A big thanks to the current supporters and to the researchers, writers, and artists for making this episode possible. We couldn't have done it without this team and this community. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to like and subscribe for more content, and check out these other related videos. See you in the next one.